Hello. Today is my first attempt at a scary story. I've always been interested in scary stories and investigative reports and things like that. So this story is going to have all of that. So there is a woman running through the park. She's missing a high heel. She loses her footing. She lands sideways, jumps up, and grabs her remaining heel. She throws it in the trees, hoping to throw off her scent. It's a lot of trees. She's tempted to run into the forest of trees, but he may find her in there. She's wearing a waist satchel. It falls off, causing her wallet to fall out. Her ID is noticeable. Her name is Tracy Coleman. The scene fades to another later period. An older woman in her 50s in a kitchen. She's on the phone talking with someone. Yeah, since Tracy's disappearance. Her eyes drop and she turns and grabs the countertop to brace herself. Scene goes to the other person, a younger woman in her 20s. Mom, that was 5 years ago. You'll never find it now. Back to the older woman again. It was my mother's ring. I know, Mom, says the younger woman. I never even wore it. The next day, the 50-year-old named Nima goes through her jewelry box, hoping to find the ring. She gets frustrated and begins throwing things around her bedspread, pillows, everything. She wanted to understand why her ring and her daughter were both missing. She began crying out of frustration and went into a deep sleep. She began dreaming, and in the dream she could hear her daughter's voice. If you find it, Mama, you will know. She could see Tracy with the sun shining behind her. She was so beautiful, hadn't aged a bit. Nima awakened and cried some more. My baby. Scene goes to the younger woman. Her name was Trish. Her natural hair pinned up. She welcomed her mother inside her home. The two hugged. While in the living room having a relaxing herbal tea, they talked about Nima's dream. She was wearing a white dress and she was so beautiful. She told me if I find it, I will know. What is it? I don't know, Mom. I don't know. When Trish's husband got home that evening, she told him about her mother's dream. So, Brad, I was wondering what you thought. Well, think back to the day your sister came up missing, where she was and who she was with. Then he became distant towards Trish. I'm going downstairs to get some milk and cookies. While downstairs, Brad began to do some deep thinking. He envisioned himself running. Then he turned and closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. Scene changes to the next day. Trish stayed asleep, or at least pretended to. Brad shook her. She pretended to have a bad headache and said she'd stay in bed all day. Good, Brad said. You need to rest. After Brad's car door shut and the garage door closed beneath her room, Trish jumped out of bed. She peeped out the window to see Brad leave. She didn't want him to get suspicious. She put on jeans and a gray sweatshirt. She drove to the library. She logged onto a computer. The story of her sister Tracy came up in the news article she read about Tracy's friend. She told the reporters that Tracy was going to a football game that day and was never heard from again. At first, Tracy's fiance, Nate, was a suspect, but he had picked up Tracy's wedding dress from her mother and told her if Tracy ever returned, he would need it. Nate was so pitiful. He was supposed to meet up with Tracy that fateful afternoon, but she was not to be found. Trish decided to check with authorities again after all these years. Investigative reporter, investigative officer Bryant took Trish to the evidence room. They had combed the area near the football field and found some high heels. Trish looked at the heels inside the bag. They were size 8, like Tracy's feet. Investigative officer Bryant asked Trish what brought her out. My mother had a dream, and well, it's silly. Try me, said Bryant. She dreamed about my sister and said, find it, and then we would know. My mother's ring is missing too. Bryant rubbed his chin and said, interesting. It was close to noon. I have to get going, Trish said. Okay, Bryant said, combing the pages of the investigative report. About 1 o'clock, Brad called home. What are you up to? Nothing. Feeling better, said Trish. Good, Brad said. So the rest of the story goes like this. Trish becomes more suspicious of her husband. She's trying to figure out what involvement he had in the disappearance of her sister, because he became distant when she asked him the question about what he thought of her being missing. And then she goes on to find out if Tracy's husband, fiance, had something to do with it too. And so you'll find out the rest of that in uh, the next part of the story when I record it, maybe in a week or so. Hopefully I can stick with this. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.